There's tons of examples of her helping us, right? I mean, that was her thing. Unconditional love was what she was about. Like, you could always rely on her just to kiss you to death. And that's exactly what you needed.
Yeah, like you could have a horrible day and just her like running up to you was like the cutest thing. And then like you would forget about whatever it was, that went wrong at work or whatnot. And she just even like a cute little look she'd give you.
A few years back, on a day that seems not nearly so long ago, Brian and Jessica Knott knew it was time to expand their family circle. They were ready to take on the challenge of caring for a baby, specifically a fur baby. Brian and Jess let their local shelter know they were looking for a small dog, ideally a tan terrier. A few days later, the shelter called Brian while Jessica was at work. Brian went down to the shelter and sat in a room where he met Zoe for the first time. Zoe was not tan. She was a dark 6-month-old terrier mix. She didn't look at all like the dog Jess and Brian had in mind. So of course Brian fell in love immediately.
I sent a picture to Jess while she was at work, and I said, "You need to get down here right now."
She wasn't thrilled with the fact that Zoe clearly wasn't the tan dog they were looking for. Brian pleaded with Jess to come down to the shelter and meet Zoe.
So at first I was like, well, I don't know, I'm looking for a tan dog. But as soon as we were in the room with her, she just instantly was like part of our family. She just was running around like no big deal. So we kind of just looked at each other like, yep, without even saying it, like, yeah, we're going to take her.
2 hours after first meeting her, they brought Zoe home. She was the first pet they'd ever adopted together. Zoe slept in the bed with them that first night. She claimed the bed as her spot from that night on.
From then on out, if you disturbed her, she'd growl at you.
Zoe loved to go for walks. She loved the neighborhood green belts and came to expect treats when she visited certain houses in the neighborhood. She would get excited anytime she heard the leash jingle. She also had her favorite ball that Brian and Jess came to call her boyfriend.
Her favorite ball, which we called her boyfriend, because she would not leave it. She'd run around with it, she'd sleep with it, and just that ball went everywhere.
As one ball got old and had to be retired, they replaced it with another, and that would become her new boyfriend. Zoe always had a boyfriend. Zoe would disappear once in a while, and as often as not, after a few minutes, Jess and Brian would hear Zoe growling. They would go into the bathroom and find Zoe growling at the toilet where she had dropped her ball into the bowl. Then she would give her patented look to say, "Well, get it out for me." Zoe was always close to Jess and Brian. She was a cuddler and a lover. She was also affectionate with most people she met.
There's tons of examples of her helping us, right? I mean, that was her thing. Unconditional love was what she was about. You could always rely on her just to kiss you to death, and that's exactly what you needed.
Zoe knew how to lounge. She turned relaxation into an art. She would kick back in serious style with her head thrown back, legs thrown open, and her belly exposed to the world. Zoe also loved the sun. It didn't matter how hot it was, she would still lounge in it. She loved hot summer days.
Like she'd fall asleep with her head up.
Oh yeah,
She loved the sun. It could be a hot day, but she would be lounging in her bed by the window, just laying there in the sun, enjoying it.
That was sort of like her trademark. She'd be sitting up, but she'd be falling asleep, and her eyes would be closing, and you'd see her head nod, and then she'd wake herself up.
More than anything else, though, Zoe was all about affection.
Yeah, like you could have a horrible day, and just her, like, running up to you was like the cutest thing.
She couldn't go to bed without 5 minutes of kissing. It was the same way when Jessica and Brian woke up in the morning. She would have to run and kiss them both before either could get out of bed. Zoe especially loved kids. She went crazy for babies.
Zoe loved kids, specifically babies. She went crazy for babies. When someone brought a baby over, she would go crazy like it was catnip for dogs. She'd have to kiss the baby, and so we'd have to hold her back from cleaning out the baby's nose, pretty much.
All the kids in the neighborhood have had their share of Zoe kisses. Zoe was all about unconditional love. She sensed when anything wasn't quite right and would just pour on the love. It was almost impossible to stay upset or down when Zoe was covering you in kisses. Zoe didn't even have to make physical contact to bring her people comfort, though. She had a look that made everything better. It didn't matter if you had a bad day at work or if Zoe had an accident. All Zoe had to do was give that little look and any anger or sadness would melt away. When it was time for the entire family to call it a night, Zoe would lie on her back with her head on the pillow right between Brian and Jess.
She would lie on her back, feet up in the air, or she'd lie on the pillow, like her head would be on the pillow just like us, right next to us, right in between us, and she was a snorer. So she'd be on the pillow next to your ear and she'd be snoring. You'd have to kind of give her a little nudge and then she'd growl at you for disturbing her.
If Jess or Brian fell asleep first, Zoe wouldn't think twice of climbing up on them and sleeping right on top of one of her favorite people. She loved cuddling, even when she was sleeping. Jess liked to dress Zoe up, but Zoe never learned to appreciate fashion.
Jess would like to dress her up in shirts and dresses and Halloween costumes, and she hated it. She hated it so much that we'd put it on her, and she would just freeze.
She'd give us like a dirty look, like, really? You're making me wear this?
And she would not move.
Zoe was definitely the boss of the house. She growled at Sugar throughout the first night Sugar joined the household. Whenever a dog walked by the house or there was something else going on outside, Zoe and Sugar would start barking. Then Zoe would nip at Sugar to remind her she wasn't supposed to bark before turning and continuing to bark herself.
When she was hungry, she'd go tap on her bowl and let you know. She'd clink, clink, clink. Let you know she was hungry, or if she was out of water, she wasn't shy to let you know.
She'd tap on her bowl and then look at you like, I'm ringing. Why aren't you over here?
And she'd get all sassy and start wagging her tail and give a little yip here and there. Like, come on, it's time to feed me.
Later in life, she got to the point where she didn't like to eat from her bowl and would growl until one of her humans poured her food on the floor so she could eat it from there. Zoe developed little bumps from time to time, and Jess and Brian got to the point where they didn't think much about any additional bumps. At one point, though, they noticed that one of the bumps was growing continuously.
They said they just had to remove them and they would do the biopsy then. So once the results came back, that's when we found out it wasn't another regular bump or fat cells or anything. So that's when it all kind of started on her treatment.
That was a bit of a battle for her. As far as she was concerned, it seemed like everything was just normal. Everything was just another day. She just had bumps. But once we started her on the medication, then she started getting sick all the time, and that was the worst part, I think.
Brian went backpacking in early August. Shortly after he left, Zoe stopped eating and just wasn't doing well. Jessica recognized that Zoe was in distress and took her to the emergency vet. The emergency vet did everything they could, but Zoe's heart stopped at 1:30 a.m.
So they stopped and they took us to a room and they brought her in and they let me hang out with her. They were great too. They said, just take your time. They had her in a little blanket. They put us in our own room. So I was with her for about half hour, 45 minutes.
When Brian got out of the wilderness and called Jess, she told him that everything was fine. She did not want Brian to be driving alone and driving a lonely highway as he grieved. When Brian walked in the door, it only took a few seconds to realize that Zoe wasn't there.
I walked in the door and Sugar came up and was going crazy for me, and then I dropped my backpack and I'm like, where's Zoe? And that's when Jess just started crying. And
In the weeks since Zoe passed from this life, Brian and Jess have had time to reflect on the life lessons they received from their sweet little fur baby. Master the look. It's way more effective than words. Soak up the sunshine whenever you get the chance. You can never have too many cuddles. Always love your peoples. Anything else can wait. Zoe, thanks for showing Brian, Jess, and now all the rest of us what a life well lived looks like. And while we're probably not going to try to lick anyone's nostrils, we will always remember the power of unconditional love.
And one of our friends even said, you know, when Zoe looked at you, she was telling you something without having to tell you. Like, she just was just pure love.